I still can't figure out, I tried to do that, but to put my name before the everyone, and but that's secondary. Basically, I feel that unless we understand, like the comment about Israel, unless we understand this long history, I'm old enough to remember actually talking with my father about the Cold War. I'm 81. And unless we understand that the US belief that they are the chosen ones, and that this, post World War II, the US took Nazis and kept them, sent some, as they called the rat tails, down to South America. So this anti-Russia has just been pervasive, and it really has connections to the religious right with this fundamentalism, and somehow Israel and the US, I think it's too complicated. I have had the pleasure of finding out that Dalhousie gives free university if you're over 65. Although I also discovered some of the professors, one in particular who taught in Putin, was such a disaster. Unfortunately, he quit. I mean, he stopped doing it. So why Trudeau in this? It's the continued support of the US is just goes way, way back. I mean, how many people know that during the Vietnam War, Canada technically wasn't in it, but we made weapons. We made napalm. And Chrétien and the government, they knew this and said to stop this, but it's jobs. So, this, and Christopher Freeland, I mean, talk about a hawk along with Newland, Victoria Newland. I mean, we are in a situation here where the mass media, as Tamara has said, there's just almost no knowledge because of the control of the media of what's really the history, like in I really want to find out more, and Tamara put that in the chat, that article of Ivan Katch, I forget the last name. I want to fully read that, but it's to me, everything ties in right now with this ongoing push that Canada and the Western world is doing, using our money. How can there be such a crisis? Russia has not invaded anybody. I mean, it's a bit like China. And I should state that the studies I did at Dal, part-time since 2014, also are tied into the fact that I have family. My daughter went to Russia to do ballet and then ended up marrying one of the musicians in the orchestra there. And I have grandsons who are 16 and 13, now 14. So I have been in St. Petersburg many, 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 many times for months and months. So this is, I won't go on anymore other than to say, unless we deal with exactly what Tamara is saying, that this money going towards war, there's always money towards war. When climate crisis and all the other things that have been mentioned is the real crisis. So
thank you, Marie. And let's see, do we want Tamara to respond, or Tamara, do you have something you'd like to say to Marie?
Yeah, sure. A couple of things. It is not easy. It's difficult to say that that Canada has been supporting, arming, and training neo-Nazis, and these neo-Nazis in Ukraine have been responsible for a lot of violence in the country and the civil war. It is not easy to say that and to confront it, and the media is not explaining this to Canadians.
Exactly.
So, for instance, Dr. Ivan Kachanovsky, he's Ukrainian Canadian. He's from the western side of Ukraine, and this is when he did his he's been doing this research, because he's been so concerned over the past decade in Ukraine, because he's so concerned about the state of his country. These are the findings that he wants to produce. He doesn't want to he doesn't want to discover that neo-Nazis are have such a control over the Ukrainian state. But this is the fact. I mean, this is what he and I talked about just this past Monday. So because of the work that he's done, all of his property has been taken from the Ukrainian state. And, he is basically in exile from Ukraine. And he has friends, other academics in Ukraine that he hasn't heard from in a year. He is concerned about the plight of his family in Ukraine, and he is from the West. The other thing is, he says, why is it at the University of Ottawa, in the Canadian media, can we not have an honest discussion, an honest, full discussion about what is going on in Ukraine? He said, we're supposed to be a democracy. We keep saying we're a democracy, and we're different from Russia, which is authoritarian or an autocracy, but we are behaving that way. The fact that he can't have an honest debate in his university, the Canadian media isn't presenting any of the Russian perspective. He said, he goes, are we really a democracy? So I want to bring that to your attention. The other thing is, I worked for the Department of Foreign Affairs 20 years ago. I worked for the Canadian Embassy in Oslo, Norway. And one day there was a World Bank protest being planned. The World Bank was having a big meeting in Oslo, and the protocol for the Canadian Embassy was to close down the embassy, and everybody went home early, okay? Because we wanted to lock down and secure the embassy, even though there wasn't any threat of violence or anything like that. It was a very peaceful march planned, and it was, because I actually participated in it. The protocol for the embassy was to close down. Do you know that during the Maidan protests in 2014 in Kyiv, the Canadian embassy sheltered for 1 week, that week, the protesters from C14. C14 was a violent neo-Nazi forces. C14. IDAR. Canada has armed and trained. Evidence shows IDAR, Azov, Right Sector, Svoboda. That is what the research shows. And now we are actually trying to whitewash that. We are trying to suppress that. I mean, this is very serious, friends. And Marie is right about another thing, is that after the Second World War, the Canadian government and the US government brought from not only Ukraine, but the other Baltic countries, Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, Nazi sympathizers. This is hard to even believe and accept, but this is a fact. In fact, I saw evidence of this when I was in Riga at the War Museum. There was whole panels about this. Latvian soldiers that collaborated with the Nazis coming to Canada after the Second World War. And then the other thing is, I really believe that we need to have courage to engage in diplomacy and people-to-people diplomacy ourselves. This is why I went to Russia for my first time in November, to listen to the Russians, to hear what they had to say. Do you know, when I was in Ottawa, we couriered a letter to the Russian embassy in Canada and the Ukraine embassy in Canada, the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace, and we asked for meetings. We said, we want to have a delegation and come to your embassies and talk and hear your side, because our side is, we believe in peace and nonviolence. We don't support Russia, Ukraine, Canada, NATO, anything. We are pro-peace. We stand for peace, and we want to end this war. And the Ukraine embassy didn't just send us kind of a mean letter, but the Russian embassy said, yes, come and meet with us. So there was a group of 4 women and we went and we met with the Russian embassy, and we are going to continue to meet and talk and try to overcome this new Cold War, do what we can to try to end this war, because we need to heal the relationship. We need to end the war, and then we need to heal all of our relationships internationally. Okay, that was a long answer. I think I see Gary with his hand up.
Hold on. Before Gary, everybody, I'd like you to know that if you drag your mouse down to the bottom of your visual screen and go to reactions, click it on. If you would like to speak, you could raise your hand, and then we can see the order in which people can speak. And I do know that Jake and Alan have entered comments in the chat long before Gary put his hand up. So if you don't mind, I would like Jake to speak for no more than 2 minutes, and everybody else for no more than 2 minutes, and then Alan, and then Gary. And anybody else who would like to speak, raise your hand and I'll call you in order. Okay, so Jake, would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you very much. Although I put my question to Tamara in the chat, but I will talk about it.
Yes.
The thing that I'm asking you, Tamara, because you're a noble person with all the experience and knowledge that you have, why do you think Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland and so on, they became so warmongering, so following US 100%, and whatever it is, it doesn't matter. They are there to do whatever US does, they follow it. And also, Trudeau became so pro-Israel that he, in the votes in UN, he is the only one with US that almost votes against every resolution. I mean, there are, of course, another 2-3 countries like Micronesia, or they all have 10,000 people. They're all supported by US, of course, so they don't really count. But it's Canada, US, and Israel that voting against every resolution. How come he is so much pro-Israel and also pro-US? Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. Tamara.
Should I reply right now? Okay. Your question just reminds me of the really the heartbreaking situation in Palestine and all of the killing that's taken place so far this year. So many Palestinians have been killed in this recent massacre in Jenin, and it's really heartbreaking. And yeah, as a mother of 2 boys, 16 and 18, I also know that the Israeli Defense Forces particularly shoots, kills, and injures Palestinian boys. And Canada, as you said, has voted against Palestine, for Israel, in all of the UN security, all of the UN resolutions. It's always standing on the side of Israel. It's in a very small group of states, including, of course, the United States, that's on the side of Israel. And Canada, if you look at our annual arms exports report from Global Affairs, Canada sells weapons to Israel. We send, like we do to Ukraine, rifles to kill and injure Palestinians. The United States and Israel are making a killing from all of the killing. One of the influences in Canadian foreign policy towards Israel and Palestine, of course, is people like the former member of parliament for Montreal, Irwin Cotler. He's a Jewish Canadian man who is now the director of the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights. And you'll often see him quoted in any of the media on Canadian foreign policy towards Israel. And he definitely has a big influence. But how Canada, the fact that Canada aligns with the United States on Israel and Palestine and puts us into a very small minority internationally, it really makes Canada look bad. When I was in Egypt talking with hundreds and hundreds of activists from the global South, activists from across Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, they have really lost all regard and respect for Canada. It's hard to face that, you know, but it is the truth. And I apologized. Do you know the entire continent of Africa is on the side of Palestine, and they know what Canada's position is, right? Voting always for Israel. And what are we actually supporting? We are supporting an illegal apartheid state that is occupying and brutalizing the Palestinian people. We've got Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and then our own Canadian special rapporteur. He just stepped down last spring. Michael Link, he was the UN special rapporteur on the occupied territories. His last report as special rapporteur was that Israel is an apartheid state. So this is something that we also need to face. We have to confront this truth that our country is arming and supporting an apartheid state that is killing its youth. So we need to rise up on this issue as well, Jake. So I'm ashamed. This is another reason why I'm ashamed of Canadian foreign policy, and we are very much in solidarity with Canadian activists, in solidarity with the people of Palestine. And I can put some links in the chat. We just had an important webinar a couple of days ago with the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute. I encourage you to join that email list, and I'll put it in the chat. Thanks.
All right, Tamara, before we go to Gary, Jake's question was, do you have any understanding of why? Perhaps in what you said, there is the understanding of the alliance. I think it's maybe psychological and monetary and so forth, some protectionism. But is there something else behind the why?
I wonder if Jake has a response to that. You know, I think that there has been a pro-Israel bias in Canadian foreign policy forever, and a lot of it comes from that older liberal guard, people like Erwin Kotler, that continue to have a great influence in shaping Canada's foreign policy towards Israel and Palestine, like I said. And also Canada is making money. You know, we are profiting. We are benefiting economically. There is also a big Jewish lobby. I saw it with my own eyes for instance, in Toronto, the United Jewish Federation, last September, for instance, the UJF in Toronto, they had a big fundraising event, and the two speakers that they had for this fundraising event was former Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper and former Republican President George Bush. Those were the two speakers for their fundraising event. So they are a strong Jewish but Zionist influence, and they have lots of connections to people in high places, and they are also shaping Canadian foreign policy. And this is why it's so important for us to do what we can to be allied with the Palestinian justice movement, And I'm going to put a link in the chat for more information, but maybe Jake or others have other
Yes.
responses.
If I can just say a couple of sentences, please. I think that Trudeau, being the son of Trudeau, he is trying his utmost to show to Canadians and to the world that he is somebody. And he launched into this idea of warmongering so he can be on the world arena, telling all other countries what he is going to do to China, what he is going to do to Russia, and why he is so much pro-Israel. It's also benefiting him. Canada does not benefit from Israel money and so on. Actually, you know, Yves Engler, of course, he just gave a lecture that there are over 300 Canadian agencies, Jewish agencies, who contribute money, and he said that it costing Canadian taxpayers a lot of money because they're all charitable status. Anyway, he is also siding with Israel because Israel is a power today, militarily, economically, politically, and as you said, with the Jewish lobby and so on. So he decided to put it all in Israel because there is nothing to benefit from the Palestinians. So I think he is just a dangerous and a bad person for Canada.
Thank you, Jake. All right, I'm going to go to Gary and turn you on.
Okay, thank you. My answer to Jake, very quickly, is that Canada is a subject or a member of the American empire. Canadian politicians cannot deviate from US policy. To my question that I have,
But Jan did.
I don't think we can. I mean, I don't approve of it, but I don't think that Canadians, that Mr. Trudeau and his cabinet, and even the NDP, feel that they can actually move away from the US policy.
Just a bit, just a bit.
No, I can't answer, Jake. It's not that format, but
Yeah.
you can put your answer in chat.
Yeah. My question is, Canada has decided to send German tanks, and according to Jake, they've already sent about $5 billion worth of money and equipment to Ukraine. After the war, has Canada planned to help rebuild the country? After our involvement in Afghanistan, like the USA, we just walked away. Are you aware that there's a plan to actually help rebuild the country with at least 5 billion or 10 billion, whatever? It's going to take an awful lot, I know.
Okay. Go ahead, Tamara.
So starting in 2017, NATO countries started to hold these Ukraine economic reform conferences. All of these corporate interests in the Western countries were eyeing Ukraine for different things. Ukraine is the second largest country in Europe after Russia. It has a lot of state assets. It has a lot of mineral resources. In fact, it has the largest lithium reserve and iron ore reserve in Europe outside of Russia. And so for 5 years before the war started, there were these these conferences being held because Western countries had these corporate interests in Ukraine. Now, there was just a conference on Ukraine economic rebuilding. So the Western NATO countries are now looking at how they're going to rebuild the country. But if you follow the previous Ukraine Economic Reform Conference and this latest Ukraine Economic Recovery and Rebuilding Conference, you will see that the way that they want to engage economically with Ukraine is a neoliberal motto. So it's privatization, deregulation, the selling of state assets, the selling of land, and what they call land reform and pension reform, but it's basically a selling things off. It's really it's devastating. And actually you hear in the media that that the Ukrainian government after 2014, the government under Poroshenko, President Poroshenko, and then Zelensky, they were that there was this European Union association agreement. Well, the reason why Yanukovych, the prime minister who was pushed out, who was forced into exile in a coup, the reason why he didn't sign on to the European Association Agreement was because it was a neoliberal economic system that wasn't in the best interest of Ukraine. So my point is that the West, including Canada, does not have the best interest in the best interest of the Ukrainian people, how they wanted to engage in economic reform, or how they want to engage in rebuilding the country. They want to make sure that the West benefits. So I just want to, bring that to your attention. The other thing is, somebody made the point about the $5 billion. Canada has spent about $5 billion in financial aid to prop up the Ukrainian government. Well, did you know that 6 months before Russia invaded on February 24th, the European Union auditors did an investigation into the financial and economic affairs of Ukraine, because in order for Ukraine to become a part of the European Union, it needed to undergo an audit. So the European Union auditors did this review, big report, in September 2021. And what did they find? Under the Zelensky government, they found that Ukraine was plagued with grand corruption. The report is 200 pages, and grand corruption is the worst level of corruption. It means there's corruption in the executive, in the government, in the bureaucracy, and in the judiciary. So 6 months before, I mean, we have been sending billions of dollars to a government that was deemed to suffer from grand corruption. There's been no financial oversight of all of this money. There's a real great concern that it's padding the pockets of the Ukrainian elite. There's been no oversight. And what's worse, in my opinion, is that we have no political opposition in this country. The NDP and the Green Party are not asking any questions about really where this money is going and where the weapons are going that Canada has been sending. Canada joined the Arms Trade Treaty in 2019 that requires Canada to have oversight into any arms exports. There's no oversight of our weapons. There's no oversight of all of this money that's been going, not just from Canada, but including, from the United States. And finally, there are some Congress people in the United States that are starting to ask questions, but in Canada, we have no political opposition. So any of you who are engaged in a political party, I want to urge you to contact the people that you're close to in the NDP or in the Green Party or the Liberal Party and say, where is the oversight and accountability here?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Now, Gary, did you want to finish your question? And if so, after you, Alan McEwen had to leave, but much earlier he left a comment that may need to be addressed by Tamara or someone. So Gary, do you want to finish?
Okay, I will just say a couple of things. Thank you very much for that answer. But the thing that really bothers me about Canada is the CBC is pro NATO and does not provide any context to the war in Ukraine. And the same is true for the Toronto Star. Those are my main sources of news, essentially. And it's really difficult to hear the things that you've said. Well, I shouldn't say it's difficult. It's impossible in the mainstream. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. All right. I'm going to read you what Alan stated earlier and had to leave. Please, peace talks need to take place in good faith. There is little evidence that Putin is trustworthy or credible. His track record is as a murderous tyrant who even neutralizes domestic opponents. He has indicated no interest in a peace deal, only destruction of a peaceful neighbor. So that's a different slant on our thoughts. How do we deal with that, I think, is his question. I mean, I know everything here has been said is that we need to do what we can about all the topics that Tamara has mentioned. I think that still we need to understand what we're up against besides our domestic difficulties.
This is a really important point about Putin. So remember when the coup happened, when the Maidan protests were taking place, the coup happened, and there was this, it led to this civil war in Ukraine. It led to a civil war because the Russian-speaking minority in the east of Ukraine did not support the US-backed illegal government in Kiev, right? And the people in Crimea who are Russian-speaking also did not support this, right? They did not support it. The prime minister that was appointed right after the coup, right after Yanukovych fled, was a person by the name of Turnichov. And this is who the United States installed. And he was the one that unleashed this violence from Western Ukraine by NATO-backed these violent security forces against the people of Donbass and the people of Crimea, and it led to this Odessa massacre, etc. But there was a tremendous amount of violence, right, in that first year. And in order to quell the violence, Russia said, there needs to be, we need to end this internal conflict. We need an agreement to end this conflict. So Russia, with Ukraine and France and Germany, came up with the Minsk agreements, right? A way to give autonomy to the Russian-speaking minority and to end the violence. And then there was the OSCE monitoring. Anyhow, it was Russia that brought to the UN Security Council a resolution to say that the Minsk agreements are recognized as international law and they need to be implemented. But we know now from the former Prime Minister of France, or the former President of France, François Hollande, we now know from the former Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, that the West did not intend to honor and implement the Minsk agreements. It was the West, it was not Russia. It was not Russia. And in fact, it was Russia in December of 2021 that was so concerned about the escalation of anti-Russia rhetoric and the increasing violence within Ukraine that in December 2021 put a peace proposal to NATO to say, let's negotiate this. Don't push at NATO expansion in Ukraine. That's a red line for us. Just respect neutrality of Ukraine, because that was actually in the constitution of Ukraine. But the US forced neutrality out of the constitution of Ukraine. And then in February 3rd, 3 weeks before Russia invaded, Russia and China released a statement. I would encourage you to read this. Was called a statement on peace and sustainable development. It was like the final gasp of, please don't continue with this. What the United States was doing, don't continue with this. We've got to de-escalation, because what was really happening, friends, the thing that you don't hear about is that in the weeks before Russia invaded on February 24, the weeks and the days before, you can see from the OSCE daily monitoring that NATO-backed Ukrainian security forces were shooting and shelling into the Donbass.
Yes, yes.
Thousands and thousands and thousands of illegal violations to the Minsk agreements was taking place. And who monitored this? The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. They said that these violations were taking place, and it came from the western side of Ukraine. It came from the NATO-backed Ukrainian military. So that's the part that we don't hear. The other thing is that there have been many times that there have been prisoner exchanges. Russia and Ukraine have engaged in prisoner swaps. We know that Russia, will engage in agreements. They will follow through with agreements. I think we should not fall into this trap that we're painting, Putin and Russia as countries that we can't trust. That just falls into a trap. That because that isn't the evidence. That isn't the case. And now I want to just emphasize that I am not pro-Putin. I am not pro-Russia. Again, I am pro-peace. But I do know a lot about this conflict, and it isn't accurate to say that Putin cannot be negotiated with. He has been calling for negotiations, and Canada hasn't been supporting negotiations. We're just sending weapons. In fact, Canada refused to send any diplomats to meet in Moscow before February 24th. There was an open invitation from the Kremlin to say, Canada and NATO, come to Moscow and let's negotiate. The Russians also said, we'll go to Ottawa. Let's engage in diplomacy. Canada never engaged in diplomacy. That's why the peace movement in Canada, in December, January, and February, we were saying, Canada, please engage in diplomacy, de-escalate, peace in Ukraine, peace with Russia, no to NATO. We just need neutrality. So it's not the case, friends. We can negotiate with Putin and we can end this war, but we need Canada to send diplomats, not tanks and guns.
And Putin has, there's a Russian government. Like, it's appalling how ignorant people are. Just unbelievable. Putin cannot dictate. It has all these things, because I follow it. RT.com, by the way, Gary, is a website that you can get information and connect through on. All of this went through the government. And as I said, because my son-in-law is Jewish, and I was on CBC radio with a professor from political science, Ruben, I can't remember his last name. And I had stated my things. This was a few months ago. And he said about Putin wanting regime change. And I said, never said that. And he wants to get, about NATO and get rid of neo-Nazis. He says getting rid of neo-Nazis is regime change. Exactly as Tamara is saying. Just the ignorance of the West is just so widespread and so appalling. And the Green Party, of which I was a part of, and still am, with Dmitry Lascaris, who should have been elected. I mean, the Green Party in Germany is taking this most pro-war stance that goes totally against all green policy. I mean, it's outrageous.
Thank you.